guys, it's Jessica from Peace Love Books, and today I'm here with my November wrap up. I read 19 books this month, which is good, but what's really annoying is I'm in the middle of 3 different books right now. So I'm definitely gonna finish at least one today. If this month was one day longer, I would have had probably 2 more books on this list, but it's okay. I have 19 books, so that means I'll have a lot more in December, and I will go ahead and get to the books I read this month. The first 2 books I read was for my author binge series, which I binged 3 Tarryn Fisher books. So the first one was Mudvayne, and I will link that video down below. This one is a weird book about a writer who is kidnapped in the beginning of this book with a man that she knows, and they are locked in this house in the middle of Canada or something. It's really cold and snowy and isolated, and it kind of flashes back to her past and how she knows this guy and why they're there and how she's gonna get out, and it was weird. It wasn't like thrillery or anything. I think I ended up giving this like 3.5 stars, and it wasn't really a 4, but it wasn't a 3. It was just like strange, not like anything I've read before. Definitely very Tarryn Fisher, and it was interesting. It's not like a thriller, but it's not just like a general fiction book. It takes a look at like people and humans, like humanity, and it was just interesting. So I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I listened to on audio, and that is Jackal by Tarryn Fisher and Willow Astor. This is book 2 in the End of Men series. I read the first one, I think either earlier this year or last year, and really enjoyed it. It is kind of like dystopian-ish. It's in a society where only women are fertile and men are losing their fertility, so we have a very few amount of men, like 10, who can impregnate women, and so their job is to go around and impregnate women. And the first book is Folsom, which is one of the End Men, and then Jackal is another one, and they obviously end up falling in love with people, and it's very taboo. The audio was really good. I do wish I read this right after book 1 because it was hard to remember a lot that had happened and who was what character, but I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 to 5 stars. I liked Jackal's character. He was much more the playboy and like enjoyed his role, whereas in Folsom he didn't, and he fell in love with a doctor, and in this one he falls in love with a wealthy ballerina dancer. So this is a definitely very interesting series. If you like the kind of Handmaid's Tale vibes but like gender swapped, you'll enjoy the series. The next book I read was an e-arc of The Wives by Tarryn Fisher. This comes out I think December 31st, and this is a thriller, and this one blew my mind. I give this 5 out of 5 stars. Our main character is I think the 3rd wife of this man, and none of them know each other, but they know of each other, and so they accept the fact that they only get their husband like 2 days out of the week. And our main character ends up finding an appointment card in her husband's pocket of one of his wives, and so she decides to track this wife down and confront her. And so it's definitely mind-blowing and does not go where I think it's gonna go, and this was just such a good read. Like even the end, I was still just like, what just happened? So it's very good. I don't really read a lot of thrillers, and this one really shocked me. So I'm 50% on in this book. I was just like, what is happening? What am I supposed to believe? I don't know, and it was crazy. So I definitely recommend checking this out when it comes out. The next book I read was for the Ravished by Romance book club that I run with Lacey and Sarah, and that is The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan. This one came out in November, and also book 2 came out as well, but I haven't read the second one of the duet. And our main character is of Native American heritage. In the beginning is her protesting the pipeline that is threatening the Native American land, and she's like 17 I think, and her mom ends up become missing, and she is just like devastated, and her mom's never found, and she meets this guy who ends up being thrown in jail with her at the protest, but he's a little bit older than her, and he is actually the son of the guy who is responsible for the pipeline. So it is their romance, and it spans a long time. So we get them when they meet, we get them like 3 or 4 years later, I want to say, maybe 5, and then we get them like 10 years later. And she actually ends up working in politics as like the Kingmaker. She is like has the golden touch for helping people get elected. She's very passionate about like civil rights and minorities, and it's their romance, and it's so good. The ending has a huge cliffhanger. It is part of a duet. I really need to read book 2, but I definitely recommend this. Kennedy Ryan writes such amazing romances. At one point, the guy is like on a mission, like a research mission in Antarctica, and has to survive, and I love that. So Kennedy Ryan did give me a really good recommendation for an Antarctica romance that I'm very excited for, that I asked for an e-arc of on NetGalley and I got approved. So I'm very excited for that, but definitely check this out, and I have to read book 2. Then if you guys didn't catch it, I did a video where I read all of the top 20 romance Goodreads Choice Awards nominees. I ended up reading, I think, 9 of them for that video, so I'll link that video down below if you want my process of all my thoughts of reading these books. But the first one is Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center. I already had this from Book of the Month, and I do classify this more as women's fiction. The romance wasn't really like the focal point of the book, but our main character is a firefighter, and her mother wants her to come live with her in Massachusetts, and she hasn't talked to her mother like at all after her mom left her dad, and then something happens at work where she kind of has to make a fresh start somewhere, and so she ends up going to Massachusetts to live with her mom, and it's kind of like the family element there, and she falls in love with the rookie that starts with her at this new firehouse, which is nothing like her old firehouse. She was like the hot shot at her firehouse, and now she's starting at the bottom of the totem pole again as a female in a male-dominated industry. The romance was cute, but it really wasn't like the focal point of the book. It really didn't start picking up until like 60-70% of the way in here, and this definitely had more to do with her family and her job and being seen as a woman in the fire industry, and the ending, there was a little bit of a mystery thrown in, and that wasn't really my favorite. Everything resolved way too quickly, so I ended up giving this 4 to 5 stars though. I did enjoy it. If you like those kind of cop firefighter shows, I think you would enjoy this. The next book I finally picked up is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a World War II historical fiction novel, and it follows 2 sisters. One is young and bold and angry about the war, and it takes place in Paris / just France in general, like the countryside, and then her sister is married with 2 or I think 1 kid. I don't remember how many kids her sister has, but her husband ends up going off to war at the very beginning of this book, and it takes place as soon as the war starts, and it's so hard to read, but it was so engrossing. I was like, there's nothing in here that can make me cry, and I went through all the hard parts and I didn't cry, and then I got to the end and I started crying so much. This book is just so sad, and it takes a look at people that don't typically get the limelight when it comes to World War II. It's the women, and it was in France, and like I didn't think of a lot of the repercussions France had to deal with because of the war. In America, we don't really learn about a lot of that. We learn more about the US side and not the fact that, hello, the war was taking place in Europe. All these places were being bombed. I know, like the London Blitz, that a lot of things happened in England. I didn't realize how much happened in Paris and in France, and how a lot of them were greatly affected by it, and how there were a lot of Nazi soldiers stationed in these homes in France, and how hard it was when all their husbands were away. And this was just a really great look at what happened and how there were women who were risking their lives to help these men and to fight this war, and it was just, I'm getting goosebumps just like talking about it. It's a very, very heavy read, but definitely a worthwhile one. I love historical fiction that takes a look at the women in the war, so like The Alice Network by, I think it's Kate Quinn, is a really great novel as well, and so I give this 5 out of 5 stars. So good, and definitely a tearjerker. Next on audio, I listened to Ruckus by LJ Shen. This is Dean and Rosie's story. They're the parents in Broken Night, so I really wanted to read this because we got a lot of them in Broken Night, and it was okay. I listened to it on audio on Audible Escape and gave it 3 stars. It was super slow and not a lot happened, and the main dilemma for Rosie was that her sister dated Dean in Vicious, and so she like didn't want to betray her sister, even though her sister's like with Vicious and like madly in love with Vicious, like over him for quite a while. She's like, well, I can't betray my sister's trust and like date one of her ex-boyfriends, and I'm just like, if you just talk to her, like this whole thing could have been avoided. And I feel like there wasn't a lot of chemistry between them. Rosie does have cystic fibrosis, so she does deal with that a lot in this book, and I feel like, I don't know how I felt about this book. I just was bored through most of it, and I didn't care about the relationship, and I just wanted to finish. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I thought I would love this one because a lot of people love this, and I really enjoyed their romance as parents, but this kind of missed the mark for me. I think people's favorite though is the next one, so I'll probably continue on still, but this one missed the mark. Then I picked up Scythe by Neil Shusterman for my book club with my students at school, and this one is a dystopian novel where people have conquered death, and so there's people called Scythes whose job it is to kill people to control the population. Obviously there's going to be corruption. Our main character and this boy, I think like both of them are pretty much our main characters, so a girl and a boy are chosen to be Scythe apprentices, and so they don't want to, but that is what makes a good Scythe, is someone who doesn't actually want to kill. Obviously there's corruption and all that going on, and I enjoyed this. A lot of the killing scenes made me super uncomfortable, especially the mass gleanings reflected like mass killings and shootings, and like I was not comfortable reading that. it just like left me very uncomfortable with the climate of our world today, but I guess that's the point of it. But I still really enjoyed it. I do think it was really slow because like most of the book was them training, and then the last 100 pages was all the action, and so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it. I see the hype. I think it's a bit overhyped, but I don't know if I'll continue on with the series. It was just okay, but I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up Within These Walls by J.L. Berg. This was a recommendation from Avery Loves Books. I'll link her channel down below. She listened to this on audio, I think, so I picked it up on Audible Escape. This girl's a heart condition, so she's in the hospital. She's been in and out of the hospital her whole life, and this guy has been pretty much like living in the hospital and working there ever since his fiance died there, and he never went back home, and so he stayed there, and then he became an STNA, so he works in the hospital. He meets her, and they form a friendship that turns into a romance, and it was very, very, very cute. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I did think it was annoying how she kind of dropped her mom to be with this guy when her mom literally has given up her whole life to take care of her and spent hours in the hospital with her daily for her whole life. She's like in her 20s now, and she just got out of the hospital and she's like, okay, bye mom, I'm gonna go live with this guy, and she's like, excuse me? I didn't like how she just dropped her mom, and it was a little bit insta-lovey, just a little bit, but I really enjoyed how they were two broken people, and it was a little cliche. She had her list that she wanted to complete that he helped her complete. I feel like that is kind of an overdone trope now, but I still really enjoyed it, gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm excited to read more from this author. Next, I read The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. This is book 3 in the Girl Meets Duke series. I have not read the first 2, but I picked this up for the Goodreads Choice Awards challenge I did for myself. Our main character is a wallflower, and she, I believe, is like in her late 20s, so she's kind of seen as a spinster, and she has a house full of animals. She loves collecting animals and taking care of them and finding them new homes, and the man next door is renovating the house so he can sell it. He has made his way from nothing, so he's not really respected because he's not from old money. He's made his way into money, and in society that's like not seen as being as good as, you know, from a high family, and so he is renovating the house next door to hers and wants to sell it, and he wants it to be a welcoming home, and with all these animals it's not gonna look like that, and so he does strike a deal with her to help find homes for all of her animals and help her into society so that she can stay there, because her aunt wants her to leave, but he wants her there so that it like looks better to live next door to her, and they obviously fall in love. It's very, very cute. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was more like a 4.5, but I just like flew through this book. The font was a lot bigger, I feel like, than most mass markets, but I loved it, and it was super fun, super cute, really good historical romance, and I cannot wait to pick up the rest of the series because I've heard they're good, and I met the other couples in here, and I want to meet them so badly. They're part of the girls' friend group, which I loved her group of friends so much, so I can't wait to read more. Next, I read The Best Thing by Mariana Zapata. Guys, you'll see in my author binge video I gave this 2 stars. Our main character it starts out where she's really angry at this guy that she had a fling with in Europe, and he hasn't responded to her in a year and a half, and now he's come to her and said like, I want a second chance, I missed you, and there's a reason she was trying to get in touch with him, and she's super angry, and she spends 20% of the beginning complaining about him not answering her, and the beginning of every chapter is her email or phone call to him asking him to call her back, and that she hates him and that he's annoying and she needs to call her back. I get it. It was annoying and redundant. This book was so redundant. It got so annoying, and the love interest, Jonah, had nothing going for him. He was boring. He was a rugby player, but he was in between teams, so we didn't see him playing rugby, and literally had nothing else about him. Nothing. He was so boring, and I didn't care, and the main character talked about how big he was like 20 million times. I get he's a giant man. Stop telling me. The biggest man I've ever seen walk through the door. Oh, it was Jonah. That was like 50% of the book. I'm like, I think we know how big he is by now. Like, muscular and tall wise. It was annoying. I didn't care about the main character. Nothing really happened, and the romance happened like 97% of this book. So I said in my review on Goodreads, this isn't slow burn, this is just slow. So I gave it 2 stars. I didn't enjoy this one. Then I listened to the audio of Sapphire Flames by Alana Andrews. This one is book 4 in the Hidden Legacy series, but it follows a different couple than the first 3 books, so it could be read as a standalone. This one, there's like a magic system where pretty much anybody has any kind of magic. Our main character is a siren, so her voice can compel people, but then it kind of makes them obsessed with her, so she has to use it carefully, and there is this like hierarchy between families, and there's like the head of the family, so she's the head of her family, and she also has this like PI business, and so she's helping this woman figure out what happened to her sister and her mom, who were found burnt to death in a house. And so that's the story, and she is in love with this guy that she had a crush on when she was little, who's like popular on Instagram, and then he ends up having a secret and helping her beat the bad guys. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's a very complicated fantasy world. It wasn't too hard to get into, but the romance I feel like didn't develop enough because like she had feelings for him before, but they had like met before and only talked like one day. And then it kind of like developed from there, and that was before the book started. So I feel like we were missing a lot of their connection, and this was just like super all over the place, I feel like, especially towards the end, and I was just like kind of bored by the end, so I wasn't too impressed. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Girl He Used to Know by Tracy Garvis Graves. This book is about a girl on the autism spectrum, and it's flashing back and forth between the past when she falls in love with this guy in college and the present where they kind of have a second chance together, and I hated it. First of all, the main character, Guy, is supposed to be the super sweet and patient man who understands her quirks and her inability to get social cues, but he got mad at her a couple times in this book because of her autism, and she didn't realize someone was making a joke, and he got mad at her for not responding in a certain way, and I'm like, dude, we've established she has autism. We've established she doesn't get it. And she tries so hard to. She's already had heart-to-hearts with him about it, and he accepts her for that, and he loves her, and they have such a sweet romance, and then he gets mad at her in those social situations, and it made me really mad. And then the last 50 pages of this book is 9/11. I'm just gonna go out and say it. People say it's a spoiler on Goodreads. I lived through 9/11. I was in 3rd grade, so I was probably the last generation to really remember that day. I mean, I wasn't anywhere close to it. I don't personally know anybody who died in it, but I do vividly remember going home and just the shock of that whole event. And the author decided to use it as a plot twist. I feel like it added absolutely nothing to the romance, absolutely nothing. And it kind of just like made all of their problems go away because she's like, oh, well, I love you because you almost died because he was in the towers during 9/11. And so that kind of like forced them to be together at the end. But we get 50 pages of her watching the news, driving to New York to the towers, and trying to find him for days. So I don't need that emotional trauma in my life. It's definitely a triggering topic that I feel like should have been addressed somewhere on this book. Nowhere in it was it. It just says that it was taking place during August 2001. So immediately I knew it was probably gonna have to do with 9/11, and it did. And I didn't appreciate that, and I felt like it was pointless as a plot device to be used because it added nothing to the story and just made me very angry that I had to be reliving that. So 2 stars. Then I read The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This book is about a girl and a guy who share a flat. She has it at night, he has it during the day. He works night shift, she works during the day. And they write notes to each other and they end up falling in love. This is British. The writing style was very hard for me to get used to. The girls was fine, but then when it got to Leon, the guy, the author chose to write it in fragments and not with quotation marks for dialogue. It was more like writing as a script with dialogue. So it would say like who was talking with a colon and then what they said and then like the person's responses. So very bizarre choice to differentiate writing styles for each character instead of differentiating voices. They made it different styles. So wasn't a fan of that. I heard the audiobook is better, but once I got used to that writing style, I thought it was super cute, especially the ending where they started to kind of fall for each other. Definitely reminded me kind of like a Bridget Jones kind of romance, as our main character is very quirky. She's very tall. She works in a quirky publishing house. So pretty much Bridget Jones, and I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The romance was cute. I loved how they would write notes to each other and how they finally met, and it was adorable. If you want a really, really cute British romance, read this one. Then on audio, I listened to Mac Daddy by Penelope Ward. I listened to this on Audible Escape, and I'm honestly like blanking right now about what this was about. Oh, okay. So I'm like confused. So they met again in college, kind of like the girl he used to know, fell in love because they were roommates and she had a lot of anxiety and he kind of helped her with that. And then flash forward to the future, I think it's been like 10 years and she is a teacher and he shows up with his son to be in her class and it's their romance. The romance was okay. I kind of was bored by it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Obviously we know why he couldn't be with her in the past because something had happened. You kind of do the math. He's got a 10-year-old kid and it's been like 10 years. Maybe it's 5 years. I think it might be 5 years. So he has a kid at the same age as the time they've been apart. So you know why he couldn't be with her, and it was okay. I think it was annoying. I hate it when people are like still with a partner that they obviously don't like anymore because they're falling for someone else, but they stay with that partner even though they don't like him as much. So that's kind of what happened here, but I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, just an okay romance. The next book I read was Brazen and the Beast by Sarah McLean, and this one started so good. Our main character has decided it's going to be the year of Hattie. She is going to have just the best year ever. She is in her late 20s, so she's a spinster, and she ends up meeting this guy knocked out in her carriage, and he is one of the bare-knuckled bastards. I think he's called Beast, and he does some illegal things in town, and one of the things she wants to do is get rid of her virginity so she's not a commodity anymore to like rich old men who want a nice virginal wife, and he kind of offers her to do it, and it takes place from there. She really wants to take over her family business of like trading and like using ships to import, export stuff, but they think a woman can't do it, and so it deals with that. And the beginning was so good. I loved when they met. It had so much potential, and then it became super boring and not a lot happened, and I was not really into the story until really the end. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Such a strong start, and then just really fell flat and nothing happened. So I wanted more, gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up Luna and the Lie by Mariana Zapata. This is about Luna, who works at a garage. She does detailing and paint work, and she was kind of exiled from her family, and so she was taken in by this guy who owns it, and there is another like kind of co-owner. It's like her boss is Rip or Ripley, and he is so mean and stubborn and big and brooding and like every other Mariana Zapata hero really, and he is quite older than her, and they work together, and it's their romance, and I really enjoyed it. Thinking back, I think it's because I read this right after The Best Thing that I enjoyed it so much more than that I gave it 4 stars. It's more of a 3.5 star read. It was cute. I don't want to spoil anything, but the romance at the end, I was just like, really? Was that really what was going on? And it was cute. I enjoyed it. There were some characters from The Best Thing in here because Luna and the girl from The Best Thing are best friends, but it was fun. I liked it. More 3.5 stars. It could have been better. Then for Used Bookathon, I picked up Covet by J.R. Ward. This is book 1 in the Fallen Angel series, and I gave it 3 stars. I was pretty bummed with this book. It was interesting. Jim in the beginning dies, and then he is brought back to life in order to help guide these people with 7 deadly sins. So the first one is greed, and he helps this guy out, and it was interesting. It was definitely not what I was expecting. I wanted a lot more paranormal. Not a lot paranormal happened until like the last 100 pages, and this is almost a 500-page book. So it just felt kind of slower. It read a lot like a Black Dagger Brotherhood book. It takes place in Caldwell. It had the same kind of writing style, but not enough for me. I gave it 3 stars. It was just like okay. In the ending, there were some shocking twists that I enjoyed, but I don't know. I was expecting more paranormal. The romance was fine. But I don't know where this is gonna go. I'll probably read more because our villain was very fleshed out at the end. So that person's probably gonna come back in the next book, but it was just okay. And the last book I read was The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo by Kerrigan Byrne. Our main character is 14 in the beginning. I think she's 14, maybe she's 16, I don't remember. And she finds a boy completely beaten and bloodied and on the brink of death in a ditch, and she and her family end up taking him home and nursing him back to health, and they kind of fall in love, but then he has no memory of his past, and he ends up disappearing and not coming back for 20 years, and then it's their romance, and I really love this. I especially loved it when it reconnected to The Highwayman, which surprised me. This is book like 5, and I've only read book 1, and it was super adorable. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I do think that once he left, it was a little slow. She does have a really awful brother who kind of gambled her away, and she is engaged to this really awful man, and it's her wedding day. And then things happen, so it was really fun though. I give 4 to 5 stars, more 4.5 out of 5 stars, just not necessarily 5 stars. The romance was great. There was a lot of action. He's a pirate. It was so good. Cannot wait to read more Kerrigan Byrne. And that is my super long November wrap up. Thank you for sticking around. Let me know down below if you read any of these and what your thoughts were, or what you read in November that was your favorite. I'd love to hear. As always, thank you so much for watching, and have a good day. Bye.